I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here inside the Hub Culture studio. It's Davos, it's 2022, and it's spring, although inside here it feels like summer, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Thank you very much for coming, Dr. Andrew Steer, the CEO of the Bezos Earth Fund. Tell us, first of all, what is the Bezos Earth Fund?
Well, first, thank you, Edie, for the opportunity to be here at Hub Culture. You guys are very well known. You do wonderful transmission of great ideas, and in your own way, you're changing the world. So we are grateful to you. The Bezos Earth Fund is a fund of $10 billion that Jeff Bezos set up to be dispersed as grants this decade. So it's not being set up to be a foundation that lasts 100 years. It's to be dispersed in this decisive decade. And it is a decisive decade, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Well, we'll get to that. First of all, you invest in two different things, right? Tell me what those are.
Well, we invest in climate and stopping climate change. And in nature. And of course, they're very linked. But they're both crises, aren't they? I mean, we are losing species at a rate that's more than 1,000 times the natural rate, and the cost to human beings of that is vast, and the cost to nature intrinsically is vast as well. And then, of course, climate change is truly an existential threat, as we now all know. And so this is the decade where we absolutely need to be bolder than we've been before.
I mean, we're in a unique tornado of crises. We have the war in Ukraine, which is causing energy prices to rise. We're seeing global food prices, or a global food shortage now at a crisis level for many, many countries. We're still in the aftermath or during the pandemic in many countries. The impact on so many of the sustainable development goals is at a level which we didn't want to see at this point. So I wonder how you look at it in terms of the way that it's making you move your money.
Well, obviously that's a vast question. You're absolutely right. Even compared to where we were at the time of the Glasgow COP on climate, I mean, life is now much more difficult. Perhaps 100 million people will be pushed into poverty this year by rising food prices, rising energy prices. And of course, the tragedy also is that donor countries who would like to do the right thing are now having to siphon off their money to humanitarian and even military issues in Ukraine at a time when the developing world needs their help more than ever. And so for us at the Bezos Earth Fund, what we try to do, even though we are blessed with $10 billion, which is a lot of money, in terms of the overall need, that's small. So every dollar that we invest or provide as grants has to, if you like, be multiplied. It has to be leveraged. And so that's what we're thinking about. So for example, in the lead up to COP27, which will be in Egypt, it's called Africa's COP because it's going to focus on Africa. We're giving a huge emphasis to Africa this year. So for example, landscape restoration. You know, half of Africa's soils are hugely degraded. As a result, agricultural yields are much lower than they were in many parts. And so bringing, if you like, carbon down from the upper atmosphere, where up there it is actually causing all kinds of trouble and actually causing death, bringing it down here through the magic of photosynthesis into trees and bushes and crops and soils, where it brings vitality and life and resilience and food security, is a very, very exciting prospect. So what we're trying to do is put a coalition together that would maybe raise several $billion to really sort of give this the kind of turbocharge that it really needs, because there are groups in Africa, thousands of groups on the front lines who are actually very, very good at this. They know what to do. They're community groups, they're NGOs, they're small and medium enterprises. Getting the funding to them is actually difficult in a way that has real accountabilities. That's what we're working on.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Why is it difficult?
Well, for example, it's actually quite hard for an organization, certainly like ours, but almost any organization, to, if you like, supervise funding to literally hundreds and maybe thousands of small enterprises. So some countries, for example, the United States, have intermediating institutions. In the United States, the National Fish and Wildlife Federation It has the job of, if you like, taking funding, and it has 5,000 implementers, and it's very, very good at monitoring that. And we need to be thinking about how could we have that kind of institution for Africa, run by Africans. And so we're currently working with some African governments and some African private sector and some African NGOs. How could one create kind of intermediating a process? Because the rates of return in landscape restoration are vast, and we know how to do it now. It's just important that the money which is sort of sitting on the sidelines, including private sector money, currently doesn't know how to enter.
Because that is so critical, isn't it? It's the 4 trillion a year that needs to be moving to, however you want to put it, the global south or lower and middle income countries every year for the next 10 to 20 years in order to achieve the sustainable development goals, but really in order to make people's lives better. So I wonder, from where you see it, do you see that we are seeing that change? Are we seeing the mobilization of capital in the right direction?
Nowhere near enough. I mean, there's some bright sparks. Yesterday, talking to the Minister of Environment of Colombia, of Ecuador, I beg your pardon, just done a very exciting $1 billion debt swap for conservation, for example. So there are some very exciting sort of developments, but overall, I mean, we're nowhere near where we need to be. You know, in Glasgow at COP26, as you know, $130 trillion of money under assets under management committed to move towards net zero portfolios by 2050. So you think this vast sum of money. Now, even if only half of it was serious, that's still a huge amount of money. The tragedy is that as of today, and so those portfolios would gradually be greener and greener. Very little of that money is going to developing countries right now. And so the trick is to figure out why. Partly it's the policy environment, the legal environment, but also it's partly just a psychology of a lack of confidence on the part of those who manage money. And we need to change that. And one way we can change it is by having better monitoring, because if you're an investor, you want to know what's happening to your money. Is it delivering what you thought? And so one of the things at the Bezos Earth Fund we've done, we've put $60 million into a wonderful initiative that the World Resources Institute is managing. It's called Land and Carbon Lab. And what it will do, using satellites and drones and all kinds of artificial intelligence, it will be able to see everywhere on the Earth's surface, down to 10 meters by 10 meters, every single week, not only trees falling, but also trees growing. It'll also be able to see from the space, be able to see crops changing, if you change. And here's the point, it will know how much carbon is embedded in that. So for the first time ever, we will have what's called the carbon flux, which is how much goes up, how much comes down for every hectare or acre in the world. And you imagine what you could do with that. Not only do you know, my goodness me, I've invested in restoration and it's working or it's not working, but also you could start thinking about a carbon market whereby you actually could have a carbon market that is monitored in a truly accurate way. And you could start getting those flows of funds which are going to be necessary under voluntary and also regulated carbon markets.
Really extraordinary. So, I had Gonzalo Munoz in here, the COP25 high-level, the climate ambassador champion. He said, when I asked him, what do we need out of COP27? He said, we actually don't need anything new. We need everybody to deliver on what they've already said they're going to do. Would you agree with that? Or to put the question a different way, what do we have to see coming out of COP27 in order to declare it's a success? Yeah. We're going to make it.
Yeah. Well, that is 80% true.
Okay.
Yes. If you think about commitments, think about sort of 3 types of commitments. There's a commitment that countries and firms make to 2050. That's pretty good. There's commitments you make to 2030. Those are called NDCs. Not so good. Then there's the commitment that individual companies make or sectors make. We will eliminate the internal combustion engine. If you take the best of all of those, I'll cherry pick, what you promised for net zero, and I'll assume that you're going to move towards net zero in a sensible line. If I cherry pick all of that, you get below 2 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature. So you're heading towards the 1.5 you need. 2 problems. One, they won't all be implemented.
Right.
And that where Gonzalo's absolutely right. The people need to deliver. But problem number 2, that's still not enough. And particularly for this 2030 goal, we still have a lot of countries that did not update their NDCs in the way they needed to.
Okay.
And so we really this year need to see
is
a nationally determined contribution, which is UN language for what we're going to do. And it's negotiated. NDC, nationally determined. In other words, no one's going to tell us what we do it.
Right.
It's a contribution. It's not a promise. And that's how they came up with that. But it's really, in other words, what we plan to do as a country by 2030. And so some have really, gone as far as they can at the moment. Europe and the UK and even the United States has got. But say for the United States to actually deliver the 50% reduction, hard work unless Congress will deliver what it needs to deliver, sort of thing. So Gonzalo is right, we need to deliver, but in addition, for many countries, we actually need to raise the level of ambition.
Final question. We can't do this without goal number 17, partnerships. Tell me about your favorite partnership, or tell me about what you're doing with the Rockefeller Foundation and IKEA, for example.
Well, that's a great example, yes. So the question is, what's happening with the energy transition around the world? Well, it's moving, but it's nowhere near moving enough. So the Rockefeller Foundation, the IKEA Foundation, and the Bezos Earth Fund said, wait a minute, wouldn't it be good to merge some serious grant funding, then get a bunch of all of the regional development banks, the multilateral development banks, the development finance corporations, the private sector financiers, and talk about what could we do together with a serious amount of grant financing that could be used to de-risk, that can be used to put in much quicker than official money can come in, to prepare projects. Everybody says we'd love to invest, you don't have enough projects that are developed. And so that's what we're doing. And last week in the Sustainable Energy for All conference in Rwanda, some big commitments were made. So it is exciting. These are exciting but sad times, aren't they?
Exactly. Dr. Andrew Steer, thank you so much for stopping by the Hub Culture studio here in Davos. It's May, it's 2022. It's been a delight to speak to you, and I look forward to catching up next time.
Great. Thank you, Edie, very much.